Welcome back to some more AP World History. Now we're going to take a look at medieval Europe. If you remember in our last episode, we looked at Europe or Christianity outside of Europe, and mainly we were talking about when we say outside of Europe is Western Europe, because Eastern Europe definitely had the Byzantine Empire for a good while of this, but we saw that Christianity is kind of fading, and what we're going to see is medieval Europe is kind of the last stronghold of Christianity. Um, so in 476, just to set things up, Rome falls. And there is no central government anymore. There is no one to control all of Western Europe. And this includes like modern day Spain, Portugal, France, Germany, or at least parts of Germany, Britain, Italy, Switzerland. There's no one to control any of this. And so without a strong government, you can't have very large cities because everything's disorganized. You're not going to get enough food sources. There's not enough support from the government to build lavish buildings and everything else. So cities shrink, and Rome will go from having 1 million people down to 10,000 people. And so it's a huge change with many people going to the countryside. Now, because of this, because of the fall, barbarians are able to take over areas of Europe. No single barbarian tribe is able to take over all of Europe and reunite it, and this is something we'll see throughout history. Is many will try to reunite Europe, whether they're Napoleon or Hitler or Charlemagne or whomever, but they just can't do it. And so they get certain areas, like the Franks will take over France and parts of Germany. The Ostrogoths will take Italy. The Anglo-Saxons will take over Britain, or at least England. And so we see that happen with the tribes, and then we see one tribe try to reunite Europe. This is the first one, and that's the Holy Roman Empire, which is established by Charlemagne in 800 CE. Some will say it actually starts later under Otto I, under 962. That's something that's just debated by historians about when does it actually start. But Charlemagne being crowned in 800 CE is the first step, at least in the process, of the Pope recognizing a barbarian king as a legitimate ruler. And that will lead us to the Holy Roman Empire, which will last up until the Napoleonic Wars in the 1800s. Now, one of the key things here to understand with these kingdoms is that they follow something that we call feudalism. And this graphic illustrates it perfectly, and that it kind of works as a pyramid, as we've seen with social classes before. And you have the kings and the royal family at the top, and they have almost all the power. However, they don't have a ton of power because it's really the lords and other noblemen that have most of the power because they control these small territories. The king has vassals, which are the lords or anyone below them that pledge allegiance to him, but they don't necessarily always have to follow it, and they don't have to follow what he says to a T. As long as they aid the king when the king asks for it, they're good, and they can run the territory they own or control how they want to. And so you have these lords with many different ranks in there, like a duke and a duchess and a lord and many other different titles that go there. And they kind of run the land, do maybe like you can think of them like as a governor for a region. And then you have the knights who protect the noble's land and will also kind of enforce things upon the serfs, making sure they get the work done that's supposed to be done. And then below the knights, you have the peasants and the serfs who are tied to the land. They work on the farms. They don't get much extra money, and life is just really tough for them. And although it's tough and they give up a lot of their surplus crops and everything else, they do get, or they're supposed to get protection from the knights and from the lords. If war comes, they're supposed to go and get help from them. Uh, so this is the basic structure of what the social classes look like. But we also want to take a look at what does life look like? And so life during this time, since people aren't living in cities anymore, most people live in these places called manors, where you have the lord's house or this overseer type's house, which is a very large building that usually has some type of wall around it so that people can be protected in there if there's need for protection. The land's then divided up into 3 different fields, and they start using what we call a 3 field system, in that they plant 2 fields, leave 1 field fallow for the year to allow it to rest and recover. And the people will then live in a village, uh, which is by the manor, but not necessarily right around the manor. And then within this village, you'll have a blacksmith and a graveyard. On the outskirts, you'll have a church, and you'll have any other like small buildings and stuff that you need to allow the small town to function. But it is self-sufficient, doesn't need much from anyone else. And so this works really well for protection and to get things kind of rolling and get Europe back up on its feet. But as we go through the Middle Ages, we'll see this kind of process slowly disappear as we progress along. Now, during this time, while the kings of tribes are trying to reunite Europe, the church is doing its best to keep to replace Rome and be that head. And so the Pope, who's the leader of the church, becomes the leader of all of Western Europe, no matter what king or monarch you are or where you're from. Um, if you're a Christian, the Pope is the person you listen to, at least on what's right and what's wrong. And what the church does is they send missionaries to all these pagan tribes, and to convert them to Christianity. And they usually focus on the elites or the kings, who then can tell the rest of their people that they need to join this. And to help aid in this process, they will make pagan rituals Christian. They will make pagan sites Christian sites, and some of the rituals and everything else they will tie into Christianity in some way. And all of this gives legitimacy to the king when they adopt this, and the Pope says, "You can rule." One thing, though, just to go back and note on the pagan rituals, this is where we get some of our celebrations and why Christmas is celebrated in the winter. Um, it's based partially off of Saturnalia, but some other things are, which was a Roman holiday. But it's also based on some other things, like the idea that you're bringing in a evergreen into your home comes from a German tribe and a German pagan group. Um, so some of those rituals we have are derived from that. Um, Now, the church will try to stay united throughout this whole time from the founding to 1054. The church is united. There is only one church. However, after 1054, there's a problem. The East and the West don't agree with each other. It's the East is a Greek versus the Latin West. Rome says priests can't marry, and the East says priests should be able to marry. You have issues with excommunication, with the Pope excommunicating the Patriarch of Constantinople, which then in turn the Constantinople Patriarch excommunicates the Pope. And so now, well, who's the head of the church? And so the churches just go their separate ways, which is then, if you remember our Byzantine part, this is the reason why the Byzantines get sacked by the Christians, because they are no longer united and they see each other as just as bad as another religious group. So the church tries to keep everything together, doesn't necessarily keep everything together, all of Europe wise, but it really brings together Western Europe and gives some uniting force there. Now, if you're wondering about women during this time, things were actually okay at the beginning. With the fall of Rome, patriarchy kind of disappears. However, over time, we see patriarchy rise, and women become less and less free. And if they want to gain their freedom or have their independence, they need to become a nun in the church and retreat to a monastery where they can get an education and kind of practice or do what they want to do and not be controlled by a man. And so women do this. They also work small jobs and help out on the farms. But it's very much a very patriarchal society, as we saw with Rome and many other societies. Now, as the Middle Ages go on, um, roughly from 476 to 12,000 or so, when we finally get the Renaissance, 12,000, 13,000, or 1300, sorry, 1200, 1300 CE, Europe will begin to revive. They will slowly bring in technology from abroad, like the compass, gunpowder, the lateen sail, 3 field system, and the heavy plow, which the agricultural improvements will lead to a growing population. The lateen sail, the compass will lead to better navigation and better trade routes, and gunpowder will lead to new types of warfare. And so Europe, to make up for the lost time and not improving and the loss of Rome and recover from the loss of Rome, they start adapting these technologies as quickly as possible and really implement it wholeheartedly more than other civilizations do, which will set them up to eventually lead the world when we get to the later 1700s, early 1800s. Now, with those inventions like the compass and the lateen sail, trade really starts to pick up. The Baltic Sea in the north uh, really begins to pick up with fur trade, wheat trade, barley trade, things that the northern areas, regions need to trade for and get. They start selling a lot of that. And then in the Mediterranean, Italy leads the Mediterranean sea trade, and that connects them with the Silk Road and really brings Europe into the fold on that. They don't have much to go out and sell to the foreigners, but they are able to bring in many products and ideas from the Silk Road. They will also set up during this time guilds, which will set standards for what workshops can produce and how to produce it and how good and high quality it has to be, which is kind of similar to what the unions we have today, that they protect workers, united them, and help them um, set standards and work up to a certain standard. And all these things, the increased trade and agricultural production and everything else, leads to more and more people moving to cities, looking for jobs, and these cities begin to grow.